The alarm cut through my sleep like a blade before I even opened my eyes. Red light flooded my quarters. A voice from the ship's system repeated the same words over and over. Power failure in the royal wing. Power failure in the royal wing. I sat up so fast my head spun, and my bare feet hit the cold floor before my brain had caught up with what was happening. The royal wing meant one thing: the Queen. I grabbed my jacket and ran into the corridor, where crew members were already sprinting past me, shouting into comm devices, faces pale under the flashing lights. I grabbed the sleeve of a technician named Ellis Grant, who looked like he had seen a ghost. "What happened?" I asked. "The stasis chamber," he said, breathless. "The Queen's stasis chamber just failed. Total shutdown. We cannot restart it before morning." My stomach dropped. I was the human liaison assigned to host Queen Visera Kion of the Doran Empire during her tour of our outpost, and if her sacred sleeping chamber had failed under our watch, this was no small accident. This was the kind of incident that could end treaties, end alliances, maybe end more than that. I ran toward the royal wing, my heart pounding harder with every step. The corridor outside her chamber was already crowded with officers and diplomats, all of them talking over each other, none of them offering a single solution. I pushed through until I reached Commander Alice Whitfield, who looked at me with an expression somewhere between panic and desperation. "Bennett," she said, "we need a solution right now. The Queen cannot remain standing in a broken pod until sunrise. She could see it as an insult. She could see it as an attack." "Where is she now?" I asked. Alice pointed toward the chamber doors, which slid open just as I turned, and there she was. Queen Visera Kion stood taller than any human I had ever met, her skin pale silver under the emergency lighting, her eyes sharp and unreadable. She wore no crown, no ornament, only a simple robe that clung to her like liquid metal. She looked at the chaos around her with cold patience, the kind that made everyone nearby lower their voices without being told to. She looked at me, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "You are the liaison," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge underneath it, sharp as glass. "Yes, Your Grace," I said, bowing slightly the way I had been trained to. "Then solve this problem," she said. I do not sleep standing up like a servant. Every officer in that hallway turned to look at me like I had just been handed a bomb with no wires to cut. I swallowed hard and thought fast. There was no replacement pod on this outpost, no backup chamber built for her species. And a queen who could not rest properly by morning might decide that humanity was too careless to be trusted with anything, let alone an alliance we had bled for. Then an idea came to me, reckless and simple at the same time. "There is a bed in my quarters," I said. "It is human-made, but it is clean, private, and functional. You are welcome to use it for the night while we repair the chamber." The hallway went silent. Alice's eyes widened like I had just suggested feeding the Queen to a pack of wild dogs. One of the diplomats actually gasped. But the Queen tilted her head slightly, studying me the way a predator studies something unfamiliar, deciding whether it is worth the trouble of hunting. "A bed," she repeated, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. "Yes, Your Grace," I said, standing my ground even though my knees felt weak. She said nothing for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Show me." I led her down the corridor, aware of every pair of eyes following us, aware that whatever happened next might be reported straight to the Doran High Command. My quarters were small, nothing special, just a simple bed with a soft blanket, a low light near the corner, and a window looking out at the stars. I stepped aside and let her enter first. She walked in slowly, inspecting the room the way a queen might inspect a battlefield, searching for hidden threats. She ran a hand across the blanket, frowning slightly at the texture. "This is soft," she said, almost accusing it of a crime. "It helps you rest," I said carefully. "That is the point." She sat on the edge of the bed, testing its give beneath her weight, still frowning. In her world, I remembered reading somewhere, rest was treated as recovery, a mechanical necessity, not a comfort. Her people slept upright in pods that monitored their vitals and shut off consciousness in short, disciplined bursts. Comfort was considered a weakness, reserved for the soft-bodied species of the galaxy. Species like mine. "You may leave now," she said, lying back against the pillow with visible discomfort. I hesitated at the door, my hand on the frame. "If you need anything, I am right outside," I said. She did not answer. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door quietly behind me, my back sliding down the wall as I sat outside her door like a guard, my mind racing through every possible disaster this night might bring. An hour passed, then two. I stayed awake, listening for any sound, any sign of trouble. Around the third hour, I heard something through the door that made my blood run cold for a moment, until I realized what it actually was. Breathing. Slow, deep, steady breathing. The Queen of the Doran Empire was asleep. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the door like it held a secret too large to understand. Every report I had read about her species said their sleep cycles lasted only minutes at a time, brief and mechanical, never deep, never restful. But through that door, I heard something different, something almost peaceful. I must have dozed off myself at some point, because I woke with a start when the door opened, just before dawn. The Queen stood in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket from my bed, her silver eyes wide, her expression unreadable in a completely new way. I rose to my feet immediately, straightening my uniform, expecting anger, expecting punishment for whatever unknown breach of protocol had occurred during the night. Instead, she looked at me and asked a single question. "What did you do to me?" I blinked, confused. "Your Grace?" "I did not lose consciousness," she said slowly, as if trying to describe something completely foreign. "I slept. Truly slept. My mind stopped racing. My body stopped bracing for attack. I have never experienced this in my entire life." I did not know what to say, so I said the only honest thing I could think of. "That is what a bed is for, Your Grace. Rest without fear." She stared at me for a long moment, something shifting behind her sharp eyes, something I could not name yet. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back toward the royal wing, her steps slower than before, almost thoughtful. I assumed that was the end of it. I assumed she would return to her stasis pod once it was repaired, forget the strange incident, and continue her diplomatic tour as if nothing unusual had happened. I could not have been more wrong. By midday, word spread through the outpost that the Queen had summoned her fleet commanders for an emergency conference, something unheard of during a peaceful diplomatic visit. Officers whispered in the corridors, wondering if something had gone wrong, if humanity had somehow insulted her during the night, if war was suddenly back on the table. I was called into the conference room an hour later, my heart hammering the entire walk there. When I entered, I found Queen Visara Khayan seated at the head of a long table, surrounded by high-ranking Doran officers, whose expressions ranged from confusion to outright alarm. Commander Alice Whitfield stood near the back of the room, looking just as lost as I felt. "Ah, the liaison," the Queen said when she saw me, her tone completely different from the cold formality of the previous night. "Come, sit." I sat, uncertain, aware of every Doran officer staring at me, like I had personally caused whatever chaos had led to this meeting. "Tell them," she said, "what you told me this morning." I hesitated, glancing around the room. "About the bed, Your Grace?" "Yes," she said. "Tell them exactly what you told me." I cleared my throat, feeling every eye in the room burn into me. I said that a bed is for rest without fear, that humans built our sleeping spaces to feel safe, warm, and calm, because rest is not just for the body, it is for the mind as well. One of the Doran officers, an older man with deep scars along his jaw, scoffed loudly. "This is absurd, Your Grace. We do not require comfort. We require discipline. Our pods have served the Empire for 1,000 generations." The Queen turned to him slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "And in those 1,000 generations," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "how many of our warriors have collapsed from exhaustion during long campaigns? How many have made fatal mistakes in judgment after months without true rest? How many have simply broken, quietly, without complaint, because complaint was seen as weakness?" The officer said nothing. No one in the room said anything. "I slept for the first time in my life last night," the Queen continued, standing now, addressing the entire room. "Not the shallow half-consciousness our pods force upon us. Real sleep. My mind was quiet. My body was calm. I woke feeling stronger than I have ever felt after any stasis cycle. She turned to me again, and something like gratitude flickered behind her sharp silver eyes. This human showed me something our own scientists never bothered to question. We assumed strength meant discomfort. We assumed rest meant weakness. We were wrong. The room stayed silent, stunned by the weight of her words. Then she straightened, her voice hardening into the tone of command I imagined she used on the battlefield. Effective immediately, every stasis chamber in the Doran fleet will be refitted, she announced. Human-style bedding will be installed across every ship, every station, every outpost under my command. Soft materials, blankets, proper pillows, dim lighting during rest cycles. This is not a suggestion. This is an order. The officers exchanged looks of disbelief, some clearly horrified at the idea of their proud warriors sleeping in soft human-style beds, others too stunned to react at all. But none of them argued, because when the Queen gave an order in that tone, no one in the Doran Empire dared to question it. Over the following weeks, I watched something unfold that I never could have predicted the night that alarm first tore me out of sleep. Reports came in from across the fleet, some amused, some confused, describing massive Doran warships being retrofitted with soft mattresses and blankets in place of rigid stasis pods. Warriors who had spent their entire lives sleeping upright in mechanical silence were now lying down for the first time, wrapped in blankets, some resisting the change with visible discomfort, others discovering something they never knew they needed. One report described an entire squadron refusing to return to their old pods, even after repairs were completed elsewhere. Another described a fleet commander who had fought in dozens of battles breaking down in quiet tears after his first full night of real rest, unable to explain why something so simple had affected him so deeply. The change did not happen without resistance. Several older officers argued that comfort would weaken the Empire, that soft rest would breed soft warriors, that this was the beginning of a dangerous decline. But the results told a different story. Fewer mistakes during long missions, faster recovery times after difficult campaigns, sharper minds during critical decisions. Slowly, even the harshest critics began to see what the Queen had already understood after just one night in a human bed. Word of the change spread beyond the Doran fleet as well, reaching other species within our fragile new alliance. Diplomats from other worlds began requesting information about human sleep culture, curious about what other simple truths we might be holding that they had overlooked in their pursuit of strength and discipline. For the first time since first contact, humanity was not being seen as the weakest species in the alliance. We were being seen as holders of a quiet wisdom that stronger, prouder species had buried beneath generations of unnecessary suffering. I did not expect anything more to come from that strange night, but a few months later, a small package arrived at my quarters with no explanation, delivered by a Doran courier who left without a word. Inside was a simple, elegant blanket woven from materials I did not recognize, softer than anything I had ever touched, along with a short handwritten note in careful, precise handwriting. For the human who taught an empire how to rest. I sat there holding that blanket for a long time, thinking back to that chaotic night when an alarm tore through my sleep, and I stumbled into a crisis I never expected to solve. I had offered my bed out of desperation, hoping only to avoid a diplomatic disaster. I never imagined that one small, simple gesture would ripple outward across an entire empire, reshaping how millions of warriors rested, healed, and thought. Commander Alice Whitfield found me later that evening, staring out at the stars through my quarters window, the blanket still wrapped around my shoulders. "You know," she said, leaning against the doorway, half the diplomatic corps still cannot believe what happened. A queen changing an entire fleet because of one night in a human bed. I smiled faintly, still turning the note over in my hands. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest things," I said. She laughed softly. Try telling that to the Doran officer who nearly had a breakdown when they took away his old pod. I laughed too, the tension of the past months finally beginning to ease from my shoulders. Outside the window, the stars stretched endlessly across the black expanse of space, and somewhere out there, an entire fleet of warriors who once saw comfort as weakness were now sleeping soundly, for the first time in 1,000 generations, all because one queen dared to rest in a human bed for a single night. and refused to forget what she felt when she woke. It was strange to think that in a galaxy filled with weapons capable of destroying entire worlds, in an alliance built on the fear of war and the memory of old battles, the thing that finally changed an empire was not a show of force or a clever piece of diplomacy. It was something as simple and quiet as a soft blanket, a dim light, and the feeling of safety while falling asleep. I never became a hero in any official record. My name was never announced across the galaxy, never celebrated in grand speeches or written into history books. But every night since then, somewhere across the vast Doran fleet, warriors closed their eyes in soft beds instead of standing pods, resting the way they were always meant to rest. And I knew that somewhere in that quiet change, a small piece of humanity had reached further into the stars than any weapon or treaty ever could. And that, I have come to believe, is the truest kind of victory. Not the kind won through strength or fear, but the kind that spreads quietly, one soft night of rest at a time, until an entire empire remembers what it means to simply feel safe enough to sleep.